Welcome to What's Next, and we welcome back with us Henri Muhammad. Henri, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Henri Muhammad, of course, of the Muhammad School of Music here in Buffalo, their anniversary, 25th anniversary celebration coming up on the weekend of, was it the 17th, 18th, and 19th? Yes, there we go.
18, 19.
Yes, that's a very exciting thing. 25 years that Henri has been working here in the city of Buffalo, working with a lot of the people of Buffalo who were once upon a time young students and, of course, have now graduated and become not just musicians, but all sorts of walks of life, as well as we've discussed previously. I'm very fortunate, though, on this particular conversation to have with me one of my colleagues from Classical 94.5 WNED, Marty Wimmer. Hi, Marty.
Hi, Jay, and hi, Henri. Welcome back to Buffalo Toronto Public Media.
Thank you.
My job here is next door at WNED Classical. I pass Jay in the hallway all the time, and I spin the classical tunes down the hall, and so they invited me to participate in this today, and it's great fun, great honor, and you and I have actually met before as well, so we've got a little bit to go on here today from having spoken in the past.
Before we went on the air, I was really intrigued by the very technical interchange that you both enjoyed. And not only do you play classical music, you taught for many years, of course, as well. Henri, of course, still teaches. What about from that standpoint, the cultivation of music, especially fine music, classical music, its importance overall? Maybe a little discussion here.
I think having Henri come in today, one of the things I find most fascinating about what you do is that you are a performing teacher. So many of us who taught really have, are so busy doing one end of it, the teaching end, that sometimes we just don't have time to perform. And somehow you have managed to keep this balance of teaching and performing very regularly, and I admire it greatly. How do you do it?
Thank you. I think it's my passion for the violin, passion for the art form, classical music, passion for sharing the gift. My parents, they gave me the violin when I was 7, and I didn't know it would become my life's passion, and as I would go out to perform, the question would come up, do you teach? Can you teach my grandchild? Can you teach, my niece or nephew? Can you teach me, adults meaning? And from that, from those inquiries, that's how the music school first got organized, and it grew. And but also an important aspect of that is going out and showing what we study, what we do. And so there's a part of my book that I wrote, and I talked about, it's one thing to be able to, cultivate your gift and, be exceptional, but how much greater is it if you can duplicate your gift in someone else, right? And so, in our 25 years, the students that have come out of Muhammad School of Music, have gone on to every field of endeavor, right? I have some that have gone on into professional music and industry, and others have gone into law, politics, education, law enforcement. I mean, really every field of endeavor. I meet students who, come back and tell me how learning the violin or learning the piano has benefited them where they eventually went on to. So I just love to get out there and share the gift, teaching wise and performing.
Yeah, I know that there's been a ton of research on how studying any musical instrument, studying music at all, benefits children in all sorts of subject areas and socially, emotionally, physically. The benefits are just astounding, not to mention just the inherent value of the music itself. We can't, we have to remember that it has a value in and of itself, in addition to what it does for growth and development for young people. You're celebrating that 25th anniversary. What strikes me about that is how quickly the years go by, because I'm a retired music teacher myself.
Yes, okay.
I taught in Depew for decades, and time flies so quickly.
Yes,
when you think about 25 years,
right? Yeah.
Can you believe it's been 25 years?
It doesn't feel like it, except when I, go somewhere, and like last week, one of my schools held a parent-student date night, and so the children dressed up in shirts and ties, and suits and the girls wear evening gowns. And they asked me to play. So I played for about an hour and a half straight with no breaks. I didn't know that was going to happen like that. But that's and so at the end of that hour and a half, yes, I felt like 25 years.
Right.
So but for the most part, the time does fly, and I meet students, as I shared, out in the community, in the grocery store, in the barber shop, and they, do you remember me? I remember when you were little, but now you're an adult. You have children, or some have grandchildren. And so it's just a really beautiful, rewarding experience.
You must have the experience that I have as a music teacher. Now, just this past weekend, I was at Best Buy in the Galleria Mall, and a grown man walked up to me and said, "Mr. Wimmer, I remember." Now, I sort of recognized his face, but he was 35 years old. I had him when he was 10. And then, of course, we got reacquainted and ended up standing there for 15 minutes talking. Have you had that experience yourself where you're walking around and people just recognize you and you don't know why, but
Absolutely. And it's just, and it's also fulfilling to know that we've had an impact in their life that was positive, that was lifelong. I can think back to my first violin teacher when I was 7, and her name was Kunda Maganow, and I think she relocated to Detroit or somewhere like that. But her name, is forever etched in my, in my core memory, and all the violin teachers that I've had that, that have stuck with me. So to have that kind of impact, that lifelong impact, the positive impact, that they, when they see us in the grocery store, in the barber shop, in the mall, it brings a feeling of elation and happiness that, for them, and it brings that for me because I know that I touched their lives in a way that was positive. So yes.
Yeah, and I noticed the feeling that it really doesn't matter to me if they go on in music in any, professional way.
Right.
I find that just the joy of having studied the music and the experience, the laughs that you have in rehearsals and in practices, those things all really matter, and they carry with people for years and decades, and people must have so many great memories of time spent with you. I read that you've had 10,000 students go through.
I think, I would teach, various years, maybe 250 students a year between public school programs, private students. In my younger days, I'm still young, but in the younger days, I could teach, 3-4 hours through the evening, private students. And the output, as I reflect on that, the output, it's kind of like, an artist like, Prince, for example, who would play an evening show and then go play an after party until 3-4 o'clock in the morning. And then the next day be in another city. That kind of drive, that when you're doing what you absolutely love, the clock, you don't pay attention to the clock. Now I'm a little more selective with my time and focus. But a lot of students, and a lot of seeds that have been planted out there in the community, and I want to continue to plant as many more seeds as I can, until I can't do it anymore. So.
That's good.
Maybe a conversation about this, just to explore from both the music teachers here. What is the key, or that you rely upon when it comes to teaching? And, there's the old saying, if you can't, you teach, right? But in your case, of course, you're a prolific violin player. So how do you, I guess, build empathy for the student who's stumbling along and trying to figure it out for the first time?
I shared last week, we presented at Lincoln Memorial United Methodist Church, which is where the home of Muhammad School of Music is. And I have a 4-year-old and a 5-year-old. I brought them to play, and I shared it with the audience, shared with the congregation that, when they're at home practicing, the parents might hear scratchy sounds and, squeaky strings, but I'm hearing, 10, 20 years into the future when they're playing Tchaikovsky, Beethoven, vibrato, tone is there, right? And I think that's that final product, which is never a final product, but that product in the future, that's what I'm looking for. That's what I'm aiming for. One of our honorees that we're going to present an award to for the festival is one of my alumni from 25 years ago. She was my very first student of Muhammad School of Music. She was 7, and she would come to our kitchen for violin lessons. And now she is she's going to be joining the faculty of Duke University, a doctorate. She has her doctorate in global economics. But that, that 25-year journey, right, for her to go from my kitchen playing Suzuki violin on a little quarter-sized violin to the faculty of Duke University, one of the top universities in the country, that's the journey, right? That's what I see when I see the young little 5-year-old walk through the door. That's where I'm looking towards. And if I can help them go that far, then that's what I'm here to do. So yeah.
Marty, any reflection on that?
I feel similarly. I've had so many students that I'm in touch with now. One of my students that I'm most proud of. Can I mention his name?
Of course.
Air? I don't know if that's okay. Well, he's in the top echelon of actors in Buffalo. His name is Ricky Needham, and he stars in everything. And I was the music director of the high school musicals at the school at that time. And when he was a freshman in high school, I gave him his first ever role in a play. And he could sing. He was a good singer. And that lit the spark as an actor and a acting musician. And now, he's having this fabulous career. He's recently at the Kabanoki in Gutenberg, and so yeah, and I have lots of stories like that of kids who've gone a long way, and as their former teacher, if you had something to do with that, whatever piece you had in that, it's very satisfying.
Absolutely.
And so yeah, I can relate to that feeling as well. I also had a parent once say to me very recently, a few years ago, that I'm doing such a good job teaching the child how to play the trumpet because the dog no longer howls when he practices. So I guess you've made some progress when the dog is no longer crying when the child is practicing.
I also, just to hear both of you kind of go back and forth, and the big names of music, Tchaikovsky, Beethoven. What about the presence or lack thereof of classical music? Should it have a larger place in the community? Well, I'd like to hear a little thought about that from both of you.
Yes, that's a good question. And I, as one who loves classical music, and classical music has so many different departments and genres, just as much as contemporary music, right? And so I'm just to give a background, I love Beethoven. That's my focal point. Mozart, Tchaikovsky. There's some areas of classical music that are not my specialty, not my taste. But I think that, those artists, Beethoven, Tchaikovsky, Mozart, the story of their lives, and the contributions that they made are similar to the contributions of people like Michael Jackson and, and I'm sorry, I was going to say Mozart again, Prince and Bob Marley, right? And so, when I bring their music to my students, I introduce them to my students in that way. So Mozart, a child prodigy, right? Here is, similar to Michael Jackson, right? Beethoven overcoming the handicap of losing his hearing, similar to Stevie Wonder, and overcoming the handicap of losing of blindness. These are people that if I can, connect my students to their life stories, then they, hopefully they'll appreciate the music, at least listen to it a little more than they may have in the past. And I think also now, there's a trend that, orchestras and classical musicians are working to kind of incorporate more of the contemporary styles of music into the classical music setting. And so I know I'm an alumni of the Gateway's African American Classical Music Festival, and they recently did a concert in Carnegie Hall, which featured Jean-Baptiste, who is a contemporary artist, but he did one of his original concertos with the orchestra. And so I think we're out there working that. There are those who do that better than I do. I'm going to bring Beethoven, when I can. I'm going to bring Tchaikovsky when I can, because that's what's in my bag. But the hope is to keep the art form alive. I think that classical music needs a shot of adrenaline to get it out of, the trend that it's in, and bring it back to life. And hopefully something that I'm doing, that we're doing, can help, do that. So, yes.
Do you find that because of cuts in music education in schools in our area, is it increasing your own attendance at your school, participation? Do you find that it has any effect on what you're doing?
Because I'm on both sides of the spectrum. I'm in the public school. I've been teaching in Buffalo Public Schools for 25 years, and as well as my private studio, Muhammad School of Music. I think it goes both ways. I think that, if Muhammad School of Music can fill in the gap where students may not have access to instrumental music in their school program, then yes, we're here. And if Muhammad School of Music can help bolster and support the instrumental programs in their public schools, then we help our students excel through, of course, private lessons and chamber music ensemble, so that when they go back into their school settings, they're a stronger player. And there are several schools where, for example, just because I specialize in strings, that the string program, a large percentage of students in the string program are alumni or current students of Muhammad School of Music. So we're out there, Muhammad School of Music speaking now, we're out there trying to make our contribution to make the overall spectrum of children experiencing classical music, experiencing musical instruments, to help expand that and broaden that.
Yeah. Interesting. I had the chance to actually visit your school. I don't even know if you remember, but
Yes.
I came over I came in October.
Yes.
Just to sort of observe. I was surprised that I didn't know about it, and so I was so shocked by it that I said I have to go find out. So I went over there, and I don't live too far from the church, and so I went over and I watched you teach a lesson. I was amazed at how your interaction with, and it was a young group too. It was a group of young students, and I noticed that you worked with them both with a violin but also with the piano. I'm just curious about why you used the piano instead of totally violin. What was that for?
I had to study piano through college, and I use the piano a lot because, one, I don't have to handle my violinist going back and forth. But also so that, when they're performance ready, I think it's an important tool to use to get them ready to go on the stage. So, for example, one of the things I did preparing the Beethoven Concerto for next week is that my piano accompanist and I, we've gone on and performed the entire concerto 2, 3, 4 times, just violin and piano, out in a performance setting, so that when I get in front of the orchestra next week, it's, hopefully I'll be more ready than I would just at home practicing in the studio looking in the mirror, So.
How nerve-wracking. I mean, it's a dream of mine. Now, I never had the chops to get to that level of playing. I was a piano major in college, and of course had the big dreams of playing, this concerto and that concerto. I never made it that far. The idea of being in front of an orchestra with an audience and following a conductor, that's got to be pretty daunting. What is that experience like?
I think it's, just to narrow it into the Beethoven Violin Concerto, the music is so beautiful, and to play it with violin and piano, is one thing, but to play it with the flute and the oboe and the timpani, which starts the piece, right? To hear all those harmonies and French horn and the first violins and the second violins, and of course the cellos, viols, and basses. I mean, it's just a marvelous thing to be there surrounded by the orchestra, right? Not in the audience listening, not listening on headphones, to an audio recording, but to be there in the midst of the actual, organic function of the music, right? And then to be able to put your part into it as the violin soloist that I'll get to be. And then just to even go further into Beethoven, to be able to articulate what he wrote. I mean, that's the miracle of being a live, musician, not in a studio, not in, of course, studio music is another experience that I appreciate when I'm able to go into a studio, but to be there on the spot, I'll practice for hours, for months, hours a day, coaching sessions. Now, all of it, is like a boxer getting in the ring. now is, as they say in boxing, now is fight time. Now it's time to put it all on the line and to do it on the spot, organic, whatever happens is going to happen. That's just a phenomenal experience,
Well, I'm glad you brought up boxing because I had a violist from the BPO I had a conversation with in the last year or so, and he told me, and I don't want to misquote him, but something like playing Beethoven as opposed to Mozart is a very athletic experience. It takes some real muscles to play Beethoven, where it's a little more graceful and not quite as difficult. Is that true? Do you find that? Is Mozart a little less
There is
athletic?
there is a difference in the playing of Mozart and the playing of Beethoven. Now, I will say, I've done Tchaikovsky's concerto as well, and what they said about Tchaikovsky's violin concerto, one of the critics wrote the next day, was that he said that it sounded like the violin had been beaten black and blue, right? So, those concertos, it is a physically demanding experience, right? So just as you talked about Mozart, a Mozart violin concerto is maybe 20, 25 minutes. The Beethoven is 50 minutes if I don't take a lot of time, right? Tchaikovsky's the same, 45, 50 minutes. Brahms, 45, 50 minutes. So to stand up in front of the orchestra from memory, playing, we don't get a break. I mean, there are some tutti sections where you get to take a breath, right? But you don't get a break. You don't get to, look at your sheet music. It's all, coming at you and you're coming at it, and it's all, going back and forth. It is physically taxing and demanding. And so, yeah.
What I find horrifying is the idea of having to memorize that much music and knowing where to start when you come in after those tutti sections. How do you know what note to start on? Or that memorization process must be, tell us a little bit about how do you memorize a concerto?
It's, practicing, playing through it so many times, and I'll perform the Beethoven concertos with orchestra, several times. This won't be my first time, but it'll be the latest, the latest display of the concerto. But practicing it, and listening to it, and then, I heard Yo-Yo Ma say in an interview, he said that at a certain point, once you've learned the music and internalized it, then you can leave the music and you can go into the aesthetic part of really making the music beautiful, making, the phrasing, and then trying to, as I was saying in the last part I was saying, trying to articulate what Beethoven was really trying to say with these passages. That's the beauty and the art of, being a musician and being an artist, and in particular playing the music of Beethoven. He wrote so much into his concerto and into all of his works, right? That, how I might play it next week, it might be different a year from now when I play it again, or I might hear something or read something about his life and say, you know what, I'm going to put that into the piece this time. So yeah, it's a marvelous experience.
We can't project what it's going to be like on May 19th at Asbury Hall when you perform the Beethoven concerto. At the same time, if you could take us into this, do you anticipate feeling elated, relieved, or will you be focusing maybe on a technical miscue along the way?
It'll be a little bit of all of it.
Okay.
There's the anxiety of, the upcoming moment. I want to make sure that I'm living in the moment. I've done all this practicing, all these hours, and I want to make sure that I'm enjoying every single moment of the concerto. When it's over, there will be some elation, right? So I did it, it's done, right?
Yeah.
But I want to just make sure that it's a marvelous experience for everyone involved: the orchestra, the conductor, the audience, my students, myself. It's a marvelous project, and learning that piece and performing it and sharing it. And I'm really looking forward to it.
And then just the sense then from the audience, are there cues you get from the audience that they're with you, they're at that moment with you? Do you get a sense of that as well?
I tend to look for that. And so the audience of Muhammad School of Music, which are, of course, primarily people from the Black community of Buffalo, and we have people coming in from out of town. It's a different audience that we might experience performing in Kleinhans, right? And so the way the audience reacts, and also to mention that the audience may not know the concerto as with the familiarity that we might know it like going and hearing it in Kleinhans. And so the audience interaction is important, and that's an important piece. and how the audience responds, which I've found is they respond in a similar way, but in their own way, right? And so Beethoven, we're going to open the program with Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, which is one of the most famous, if not the most famous,
Sure.
piece of classical music ever written, right? But that piece, regardless to when it was written, which is close to 200 years ago, where it was written, that piece, or who's playing it, and who they're playing it for, that piece always has a universal response because of the power and the energy that Beethoven wrote into that piece, right? And then to go to the concerto, the Beethoven Violin Concerto, I'm just really looking forward to feeding off the audience, right? That day, May 19th.
With all that going on, though, how do you stay in the moment? How where does that come from?
It's the focus, it's the excitement, it's the Beethoven in me that hopefully will be coming out that day. I read a story, an article of Beethoven where whoever wrote the story wrote that he said that when Beethoven would perform, men would weep and women would faint, right? I mean, that was the energy that he had, right? But you know what I thought about when I read that? I thought about Michael Jackson. I would see those video clips of people fainting in the front row of Michael Jackson and passing out and foaming at the mouth. I mean, they just had that energy, right? That aura about them, and hopefully we'll be. I don't want anybody passing out in the front row, but I want to bring that energy of Beethoven, next weekend.
Who's conducting?
Christopher Weber will be our conductor, and the orchestra is the La Camerata de San Antonio Chamber Orchestra.
Okay, right here behind City Hall.
Right, yep, behind City Hall,
nice.
and an outstanding orchestra who I performed with a couple years ago. We did the concerto of Saint George. We did the double concerto. I and Diana Sachs, who's the first violin with the Philharmonic, we performed that double concerto, and I did a violin solo of William Grant Still, titled Mother and Child, with them. And so they'll be joining us next weekend. And as you know, the orchestra is made up of members of the Philharmonic and the Cheektowaga Symphony and the Amherst Symphony. So all professional musicians who bring their professional experience, but their professional energy, to the piece, to the program. And so we're going to not only feature the Fifth Symphony and the Violin Concerto, but my students will be joining the orchestra for a side-by-side. And then both the opening piece and then the finale will be the meditation from Thais that I'll be.
Now, for anybody who's listening to us right now who wants to know where, when, time, when is all this happening? Where?
Yes, so next weekend, May 17th, 18th, and 19th is our 25th anniversary festival weekend. So we have events planned on Friday evening at 7 p.m. All the events are at the Babeville Performing Arts Complex on Delaware and Tupper, 341 Delaware. So we'll be there Friday night in their ninth ward, it's called, which is like a nightclub in the basement of the old church, right? But in the basement, it's the nightclub. We'll be there at 7 p.m. for our VIP reception and party. And then Saturday afternoon at 3 p.m., we'll be in Hall Walls Contemporary Arts Cinema, which is in Babeville. And that will be the student recital. So you'll get to see and hear the students of Muhammad School of Music presenting their annual recital pieces. And then Sunday in the Asbury Hall, which is at Babeville, which looks like the church, but it's actually the concert hall. Sunday, May 19th at 3 p.m. is the Gala Orchestra concert. And so you can get tickets at the Babeville box office or at my website, which is www.henristar.com. Henri is spelled HENRI, star STAR.com/MSOM. That's Muhammad School of Music, MSOM 25. Everything is on there, and we'd love to have Buffalo come out and celebrate with us.
Sounds great.
Yes.
Henri Muhammad is with us on What's Next, and along with Marty Wimmer as well from Classical 94.5 WNED. I was intrigued by, as you were talking about staying in the moment, one of the reasons we wanted to have you in here is to also offer some reflection on May 14th. We're here on the 2-year anniversary of it as well. A lot of people going through trauma. And I'm wondering if there's a connection of that ability to stay in the moment. If maybe over the years you've found, whether it's with your students or others, who have been able to transform trauma of their lives by using just that idea of staying in the moment, of focusing on craft. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's an excellent point and an excellent question. And one of the gifts, the blessings of being an artist, is that we learn to, you know, to transcend, to heal trauma, through our art form. Whether it's music, dance, visual art, all of us kind of learn how to do that. And so, I know personally, I was personally touched and affected by May 14th. As I was sharing that one of our longtime donors and supporters of Muhammad School of Music for the entire 25 years was one of the victims of May 14th, Catherine Cat Massey. And, that during that time, that year, we held a recital in February. And, Mrs. Massey would always send, she was old school. She would send a greeting card, handwritten note in the greeting card with a little check folded in half. And so I got that in the mail for our February recital, and the card sat on my desk, right? And it was so several months later. Now here we are, May 14th. Of course, the tragedy itself was shocking because that location, the Tops location, is just a couple miles from Muhammad School of Music, and it's in a neighborhood that I grew up in as a child. That was where our church was. It was where the barbershop was that we had gone to as I was a young child. And so it really hit home, but it even hit home even deeper when I learned that one of the victims was Mrs. Massey, whose card sat on my desk. And so I attended several memorial services for her, memoirs, and I would bring my violin to play and hopefully, offer, a musical healing through my instrument, a musical memoir for Mrs. Massey and all of the victims, and their families. And it's just, what we learn to do, to take our expression, our gift, and use it in whatever way we can to heal, to soothe. Yes, so that's
And if
how
I
we
may
do it.
just follow down that road just a little bit, what has it been like for the last 2 years? I mean, again, you're busy. You're a guy. We talk a couple of times. Up at 4:30, you're playing, practicing, teaching all day, but at the same time, you're inside the community, probably like few others are. Any sense of where the community is, what it has gone through in these last 2 years?
I think, at least for me personally, I think there's a certain, even still, there's a certain, disassociation with what has happened. I drive past that Tops on the way to the music school sometimes, and again, just the feeling of, did this happen? How did it happen? Why did it happen? Did it really happen? Of course, it really happened. I think the community is doing its best to heal because the community has a lot that goes on. But I think that, the process of healing is something that I heard a therapist say, it takes as long as it takes,
Right.
And I know for my children, for my students, this will be something that will be with them forever, and I'm hoping that we will never have to experience anything like that again. But I want to give at least my students through our art form, the ability to, go out and use their art form to express what it is that they might be feeling, whether it's this tragedy or another tragedy that they might encounter later on in life, to take your violin or your piano or your guitar, to play a piece, maybe write a song or write a poem or write, offer something that allows you to, creatively, help yourself, help others that might need help. I have a student actually who graduated last year that's headed into music therapy at Nazareth College in Rochester. And so, those are the lessons that I try to give the students, that they can use their art form to help heal others. That's what we want to try to do.
Did you feel in the aftermath, which I guess we're still in,
Mhm.
speaking of children in particular, the children you teach, did you find yourself having to handle things differently, maybe do some counseling, maybe let them talk? Did you have experiences like that in your lessons?
Yes, I did. I actually had one student, an elementary student, whose father was in the store that day.
Hmm.
And he, to even, give more details, I think he may have been grazed, by a bullet, right? But for the child, to experience that, our role, as I'm sure you know, as teachers, but we have dual components as therapists, as just being a good listener, as a counselor, and it's really moments like that, that are outside of the instrument, outside of the classroom, quote unquote, where we can have the biggest impact when we can give our students, tools that they can take with them. Because again, this may not be the last time that they're going to experience some sort of trauma, some sort of, tremendous loss. It could be the death of a parent. It could be, maybe some sort of community violence in their neighborhood. As one who teaches in the Black community, my students have experienced, along the way, have experienced everything from drive-by shootings to, the loss of a parent, a loved one, a sibling, a relative. And so, those are the times when I get to show up, and if they need someone to just listen, I can do that because I'm a musician. I listen. If they need someone to help guide them in a way where they can, express what it is that they're feeling, maybe through their instrument, maybe through a creative expression, I can help, guide them along that way. I just, do my best to show up as best I can with my resources and tools, and then, help them get through those moments.
Any thoughts about the community, maybe in the last 2 years? Like you said, there have been many other issues that have been dealt with over the years, long before May 14th of 2022. At the same time, though, have you had a chance, or perhaps other people, reflecting on, we're seeing something out of a community under tremendous trauma and stress, and what it's showing of itself in these last 2 years?
I think that the community, when we have the opportunity to, when we're faced with a tragedy, that we do our best to show up, and I think that because I've grown up in this community my entire life, except for going away to college or to go away to perform or somewhere, or to do, workshop or something like that. But, Buffalo's been my home. I love Buffalo, and the East Side, the community of the East Side has been my home. And I think that, we have a lot of healing that we've been able to do, but we have a lot more that we need to do. I know just last night or the night before, there was a story of a 14-year-old girl that was murdered, right? And, whenever I hear stories like that, I always, hold my breath a little bit, because I don't want to hear a name that maybe I've taught before. And there have been times where there have been names that I've, that student was in my class 10 years ago or 15 years ago, or I'll get a phone call from a grandparent. And so, I think that, we have resources out there, and all of us have to do our part to show up, to serve in that healing cause, right? And so, when I'm called upon to perform at, the funeral service or the memorial service, as I performed at several memorial services following May 14th, I try to answer that call and bring my expression, bring my toolbox to do offer what I can to help, rebuild in a certain way. And there are many resources like that all of us, doing our part, I think collectively we can, move things towards that direction of healing.
So you've taken on a lot of this emotion. You've taken it inside you. How do you, the artist, then?
I try to process it, through the art form. I know that, for example, next weekend, as I approach the Beethoven Concerto, that piece, the way he wrote the piece, there are so many facets of Beethoven's life that are in the piece, right? Of course, there are the joyous moments, but there also are some very sad and tragic moments. And so it's in those moments of the concerto where I as an artist, I'll draw into those moments of loss that I might experience, or someone else's loss that I've heard of, and try to articulate that through the notes, that I'm playing in that particular passage. And then Beethoven, as you know, his music, it returns to the triumphant, right? And so those will be the parts where, the triumphant overcoming of the obstacle, the challenge, the trauma, the tragedy, that's articulated through the music. And so, being a musical artist is such a phenomenal, experience. And I also encourage everyone, child, parent, to give your child, this opportunity, because it's nothing like being able to sing a blues song, after a breakup, or write a waltz after an exciting, exhilarating moment. Those are the times when being an artist is just a marvelous experience.
We've heard the term black joy. Some people have a lot of definitions regarding that. For you, is that a term that you understand or appreciate?
I've heard the term, and I think that just thinking about the Beethoven concertos as my face kind of lights up.
Yes.
That third movement, and that even as we were talking about earlier, that last page, that triumphant ending. Beethoven in his life, and the sorrow of losing his hearing. But what I share with the audience sometimes is that when Beethoven lost his hearing, that's like a career-ending injury in sports, right? And Beethoven even contemplated suicide, but he overcame that tragedy, that trauma, to really become one of the most, if not the most, greatest classical music composer of all time, right? So that triumphant, that tragedy that he overcame, that comes forth in his music, and the ending of the Fifth Symphony, the Beethoven's Ninth Symphony that the Philharmonic is going to be performing this coming weekend, right? These are triumphant moments, right? And so, for me, and what I've faced, and what my community has faced, and what my students face that I hear and then I internalize as their teacher, I want those moments to come through the music, right? To come out of what I hear and what I experience. I transmute that through the music, so that the music comes alive for me, for the audience, in such a way that it all comes to life.
You use the word triumph in regard to Beethoven overcoming his hearing loss. He was, maybe 30 when it was totally gone, and he lived another 27 years. And some of the greatest music he wrote was when he couldn't hear a thing. Those late string quartets, the Hammerklavier Sonata, the Beethoven Ninth Symphony. When you think about triumph, when you look ahead to black joy and what we're talking about today with what happened on May 14th, 2022, what do you think about what's a triumph for the community, for your students, as we move from the tragedy, the horror of what happened? What, in your view, would be a triumph, a recovery, or the future for that?
I think that one of the triumphs that I observed from May 14th is the way the community came together, the way we all offered our support services. And I know during that time when the store Tops was closed, but there were organizations, community groups that brought in groceries to make sure that the community that where that store is located wasn't without food and resources, right? So it was a sign that even though we experienced a tragedy, the triumph was the way the community responded in a unified, supportive, a show of solidarity. And so I think that it's lessons like that. We don't want to have another tragedy like we had May 14th, but if we can galvanize that moment and those resources and utilize it towards supporting the community more and more in that way, I think that is the point that we want to take from that experience.
And when I think of Beethoven, so many of his works are triumphant. It transcends music and actually is about humanity and humankind, and it means more than just those notes on the page.
It does,
And when you play that Beethoven violin concerto, boy, that ending, that is a triumph. It's more than just notes on a page. It's all of humanity and the universe and life. And wow, I can't wait to hear you play it.
And that's the beauty of it, because he wrote the piece 200 years ago, and to write something that 200 years later is still touching hearts and bringing inspiration and hope and joy. His Ninth Symphony that the Philharmonic is going to play in a couple days. That symphony, I mean, which was at the time, the largest orchestra ever written for, the longest symphony ever, over an hour, orchestra, chorus, vocal soloists. And here is Beethoven, completely stone deaf, never hearing a note of the miracle of what he wrote. And here it is, 200 years since Beethoven premiered that symphony. We are still playing, still talking about it. Beethoven didn't know that Henri Muhammad would be sitting in the studio today, but here I'm talking about you, Beethoven. I'm going to try to play your concerto next week. And he's Beethoven. It's like he never died. He's still alive, still giving violinists gray hairs and trying to play what he wrote because his music was just that challenging. So he's ever present.
That's just amazing.
Do you? I think we already know the answer to this, but is Buffalo? Is it in your art? Is Buffalo in your art?
I think it is. As I shared, I grew up, born and raised here, and I love Buffalo. I've traveled all over the country, and I've lived in various cities all over the country. But I was telling my daughter earlier in the car that, Buffalo it's a very special place, but it's a very ideal place, and I think that as an artist, at least for what I do, as a family man, for being a family man, as a teacher, as one who is active in the community, I think Buffalo offers everything that we would hope for to bring all those facets together at the same time, and I think that Buffalo, as a town, uniquely for the arts, has such a wide range of artistic genres and specialties and opportunities that I just love Buffalo, and I hope that Buffalo will continue to rise in the artistic spectrum, with what's happening in the movie industry here. The Philharmonic is, winning Grammy after Grammy, and we just have a lot going on here in the theater and the dance arts. It's just an outstanding place, Yeah.
I will not disagree with that. That's for sure. What would Beethoven have thought of Buffalo? How's that?
I think he would have. I think it would have been a place that he would have been able to draw from the spirit and the energy here, and maybe put something together on paper, with musical notes that would be, a reflection of what's happening here. So
divine intervention. How about that? When it came, is Beethoven, is he connected to the divine? Is that I wonder how you guys might think about that.
As I'm a very spiritual person. I have a spiritual practice, and when I listen to the music of Beethoven, of course there's the technical aspect of learning his music, the notes and the page and the articulations and just getting the notes right. But then there's the part that has me wonder, and Beethoven himself was very spiritual. He always talked about his connection with the divine and his inspiration with the divine. So that part was present in him. But what he was able to do and being able to write music in deafness, right, and to write it so perfectly. I mean that I've written compositions. I've written pen to the paper compositions. But the way Beethoven wrote the notes, and as a pianist, I'm sure you know this, and as a violinist, and on any instrument, even as a conductor. So for Muhammad School of Music's 10th anniversary, we did a side-by-side with the Philharmonic, where I conducted an excerpt of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony with the Philharmonic and chorus. And I remember the conductor at the time coming into the dressing room, and I told him I was going to do this excerpt of the Ninth Symphony, and he told me, he says, conductors have crashed and burned trying to conduct that, right? So, I mean, here is Beethoven. How do you write something like that, where 200 years later, we're still trying to learn how to play what you wrote that he himself never heard, right? I mean, that has to be a spiritual connection, a spiritual revelation that Beethoven was given. And as a spiritual person, I try to approach his music in that way, so that whatever Beethoven got from God, from on high, give me some of that next Sunday, because I'm going to need it when I try to play his music, Beethoven Violin Concerto.
Oh, that's amazing. It's such a nice and fascinating look at Beethoven. But you're right about that. I have to agree. There has to be something divine involved in that kind of writing, because here it is 200 years later, and people are still trying to figure it out and learning the notes, and you'll be playing the notes coming up here soon. So how does that feel? What the days leading up to a big event like that? Are you nervous? Are you excited? Some combination of both?
There's some nervousness. There's the excitement. There's some anxieties. But all that hopefully will come together. As I've been preparing. So as the students, prepare and they come for lessons and they practice, supposed to practice. It's been the same for me. I've had a coach, and she has been coaching me for the past year on the concerto. And so, all of the practice and the lessons and the other things, of course, there's the physical demands, which requires physical exercise and eating right. And, all of those things are going to come together. And so there's the excitement of, how it's all going to manifest on next Sunday. Right. And, I'm just excited just to see what's going to happen. Hopefully I've learned the notes well enough that I can step out of the technical, focus and step into the aesthetic, artistic expression. And, and that's when we get to, listen to the conductor and listen to the orchestra and listen to the winds. And, there's some exchanges between, the violin solo and the horn section, the violin solo and the wind section. And then the first violins come in, and then then the solo comes back in, and then the audience, how they respond to this part of the piece. I mean, there's just a an interaction that comes with playing it live that, I'm really looking forward to.
Will your students be present?
Yes.
All the students?
Yes. They'll be there to see it, to witness it. They'll also be performing on the program. I'm excited to work with the La Camerata de San Antonio Chamber Orchestra. I mean, these are some of Buffalo's finest classical musicians, right? And so the energy, the expertise that they bring, I mean, we're just honored to have them, be our festival orchestra. And so it's definitely an exciting time.
Boy, if you play as well as you describe, the people are going to be in for a great treat.
Yeah.
One other treat, I guess, a treat of sorts, is you are going to play a piece for us today.
Yes,
And what is it?
So I brought with me which will be the finale of next week's concert. So if you stick around on next Sunday, you'll hear this piece with the orchestra. But it's the meditation from Thais by the composer Jules Massenet. And what makes this piece special in terms of, in the context of May 14th, is Massenet, who wrote this marvelous opera. And I've listened to opera. I can quote unquote tolerate opera, right? I performed operas before in the violin section, but operas are all sung. There's no spoken lines. There's some dancing, there's some acting involved, there's costumes and props. But what carries the opera is the singing and the music. But Massenet, for this part of the opera, which is like the climax of the opera, when the main character Thais, when she dies, Massenet decided, rather than having another song for this climactic moment, I mean, this should be the greatest moment. He said, rather than have another song sung, because it's all been singing, he said that he wanted to have the violin play a solo that would be like the song without words. And so this violin solo, Meditation from Thais, has actually become a staple in violin, literature, right? So, for example, as it's the encore for next week, after the violinist plays, all the notes of the Beethoven or the Tchaikovsky, right, or the Brahms concerto, and there's all these fast notes and loud and, flash and bang and pyrotechnics and all this happening, then the encore, now the audience wants to hear, can you make the violin sing, right? And so the Thais is that piece. It's a very dolce, sweet, beautiful piece. There's not a lot of, flash and bang and pyrotechnics, but there's beauty. And that's when you really get to hear what the violin, the instrument, can really do. And so It's a beautiful piece, and I performed it numerous times, following the May 14th tragedy, because along with its beauty, there's healing in the piece. To go back to the opera, when this piece is played as the climax, the the main character, Thais, she's passed away, and her love interest, I forgot the name of the character in the opera, but this is the part where he goes into a meditative state. He's a prayerful, quiet, solemn, sorrow, loss, tragedy. And so the violin articulates what is in his heart, what is in his thoughts during this time. There's no words. It's just the violin that plays that. And so I think it's a timely piece for May 14th because, what we all experienced, the tragedy and the loss and the sorrow and the pain, that comes through the violin, through the instrument whenever I perform this piece. And so that's the piece that will end our concert next week, Sunday.
Marty Wimmer, thanks for being with us on What's Next.
Thank you. This was my first time with What's Next, although I've worked with you many times before, Jay and Henri. I can't wait for the concert. It's been great having you here today. And by the way, this Thais meditation, I think, of all the operas and all the music that Jules Massenet wrote, I think it's his most famous tune.
Yes, it is. It is.
So isn't that ironic? So we're going to hear it now.
Absolutely. Henri, then we're going to set up our mics, but thank you for being with us on What's Next.
Thank you.
You're listening to What's Next, our place to discuss the important issues of our communities of Western New York and Southern Ontario. We want to hear from you. Click on the Talk to Us option in the WBFO app, and we will work to get your questions or comments on the air. Do you have a story or concern that we should be addressing? Email us using whatsnext@wbfo.org. Together we'll have the conversations that are needed. This is WBFO, your NPR station.
Thank you for joining us for What's Next here on WBFO. And we now have for you violinist Henri Muhammad playing the beautiful meditation from Jules Massenet's opera Thais.